So how much does the average Vietnamese sweatshop worker earn per month? The answer is only £23.
They're all laughing at me because I've got a new earpiece and it's a bit too small. And if I sit normally, it falls out, so I'll just do the rest of the show like this. Or like this. First, your money or your morals. As the credit crunch bites, I wonder if you'll be trading your morals for cheaper, less ethically produced food and clothing. It's all very well taking a high and mighty stance to mass-produce goods, but if you're trying to raise a family on the national average wage of, what, 24.5 grand a year, a couple of pounds difference between, say, a free-range chicken and a battery bird is a hell of a lot. According to one supermarket chain, Mr and Mrs Average have something like £120 a week to spend on food, clothes and transport, not just for them, but for their kids. And with the cost of living shooting up nearly 12%, according to today's Daily Mirror, a pound here and a pound there, it's going to be crucial, you know? So, as the credit crunch bites, how many of you will abandon your morals, even if you don't really want to, in order to feed or clothe your family? Give us a call. As I said, it's only going to cost pennies. The trend for dirt-cheap clothes has been one of the biggest things to hit British fashion in the past decade. You know, T-shirts for a couple of quid, jeans for a fiver. Now, someone has to pay for such low, low prices, and it tends to be the people who make them in the Far Eastern sweatshops, where wages are often less than £1 a day. Then again, you know, a lot of their fellow countrymen and women would probably dream of earning as much as that, sad to say. Primark, by the way, the story in most of the headlines over the weekend say they didn't know about the sweatshops they've been involved with and have stopped using them. These are the ones with child labour. Sweatshops generally £1 a day, £2 a day. Would you buy a £2 T-shirt if you could afford to pay more? Should you visit second-hand shops before you pay pennies for brand new clobber? And if you do pay more for your clothes by going to a top designer boutique, are you actually being more ethical? Because I know many famous labels use foreign sweatshops where wages are less than £2 an hour. David, what do you think? It's difficult, isn't it?
I think this is a very difficult one, and part of the difficulty isn't the moral aspect. I think the moral aspect is clear, actually. You know, there are up to 240 million children in child labour, and much of it what we'd call almost slave labour because of the paucity of their remuneration. But
then also there are children starving who don't have any money at all out there. So,
I was going to say, but comparable to wages in those countries. Yeah. They're low, but then they're not, you know, nothing.
I'm just thinking about, just primarily from our viewpoint here, are morals in terms of produce something you can only have if you can afford them?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I actually think that, you know, when you look at clothes, the markup, let's take clothes. The markup on clothes is ridiculous. That's why, you know, you can get a pair of jeans that cost 150 quid. You can walk into TK Maxx and buy them for 30 quid. They're the same jeans. It's just the markup still means that at £30 you can make profit. If you can make profit at clothes that are cheap, then why do they have to be so expensive? I would rather...
But then some clothes aren't expensive. Let's take, like, £3 T-shirt, right?
Yeah.
If you haven't got much money, should you buy a T-shirt for £3 with the almost full knowledge that it's been made in a sweatshop, or should you pay more for a product that may also be made in a sweatshop but you're not too sure?
The trouble is, though, Matthew, yes, you're right, but the problem is that T-shirt can be made in a place that isn't a sweatshop and still cost £3 if the people selling it would take a smaller profit and a smaller markup.
Well, Primark are worth, what, £5 billion? £5 billion. And I just don't understand how a spokesperson can say, we had no idea.
It was specifically about child labour.
Yeah, they had no idea that children were working. But how a company that big and that successful, someone knows what's going on.
Hang on.
To release a statement saying we've got no idea.
I know for a fact oil companies, right? Oil companies drilling off the coast of Africa, they're actually trying to keep the oil from actually going into Africa by building refineries offshore because they don't want the people who actually own the oil to actually get any money's worth out of it. You know, the exploitation of the third world is what funds capitalist economies. Yes. It's everywhere. But let's talk about chicken then. If you're tight, Claire, if you haven't got much money, right? The credit crunch is biting. Your rent, your mortgage, or whatever is going up. You've been eating free-range chicken because you want to make an ethical stance. You don't like battery chickens. All of a sudden, you're skint. Do you go without chicken altogether, or do you buy battery? I mean, I think I would, if I had kids to feed, I'd buy battery.
I think there's ways for people to save money. So instead of going down to your big supermarket, you go down to the market where it might take you 10 extra minutes to do your shopping, but you can probably get
Make savings, yeah.
Make some savings. you know, it's where you prioritise things. If you want to eat free-range meat, you'd save money elsewhere, not buy pop for the
there was
week
a lady
or
that
crisps
there was a lady that phoned this show a few weeks ago whose husband was a trainee teacher, and I think she was trying to raise her family, one child, another on the way, and husband and herself on £30 a week. Now, at that point, I find it very difficult to believe that she would be in any position to pay more for an ethical, a better produced product. She's going to be struggling to just feed the family.
And I think there's a big demand on retailers to satisfy people that, talking about food specifically, we don't eat properly. I think the adverts which Sainsbury's is doing at the moment are fantastic. They're showing you can cook a really good family meal for like £4 or £5 instead of eating pizzas and rubbish. Yeah. So, you know, I think there's a really big educational piece which needs to be done.
But if you're skint, is it acceptable to waive your morals? Are morals things you can only those with cash can afford to have? Or should everybody somehow should you turn your back on battery chicken if you don't agree with it and I don't know, eat leaves?
I think there's a pushback to the retailers where they should be helping the population to eat properly. So
cut the profits.
Maybe they keep the price flat on free-range chicken, but they make money somewhere else within their chain. So I think there's it's a
thought.
Can I just say what we've seen from food retailers, as we've seen from banks with interest rates, and as we've seen from petrol companies, is that when costs go up to them, they always pass it on to the buyers. I actually think that
when they go down, they don't.
When they go down, they don't. They stay
back.
Exactly the same, and they say we haven't increased our costs. And what they mean is since the last time we increased them. I think it would be very good, and I think it would be very popular if maybe somebody actually took a cut in their profit rather than passing it on, so that people could afford to be ethical.
OK, so Claire, when you're running your multi-million-pound corporation, will you cut your profits to help people or make a more ethical choice?
I would do, and I think, you know, every year, I think for the last 4 or 5 years, Tesco's reported as the biggest UK retailer a 10% increase in profit. Do they really need to be making 10%? Could they make 8%?
Do you know what? If you cut your profit, you'd increase your turnover. Yeah. Because people would know.
Gail, what do you think? Do you think morals are something you can only have if you can afford them?
No, I don't think so. I think you can make... I mean, I've never been to Primark in my life, and I would... You know, it's very difficult. The one thing I find is really difficult is, like you say, when you can buy designer jeans and it could still be getting made at
a sweatshop.
But how, you know, there should be more... There should be something done so we know exactly where everything's coming from. Yes. You know, I work a lot with fair trade, and although it is a little bit more expensive, and, you know, I feel the credit crunch like everybody else does, but I know what I'm buying, and I also make sure I get healthy food for Honey. And, you know, we don't eat... Well, she'll eat meat, I don't eat meat, but if it comes to it and I can't afford to buy a free-range chicken, well, she's not having chicken. We will have more vegetables.
And by the way, fair trade is growing massively because people want to make an ethical choice.
And because it answers the question of where does it come from.
And I've been out there to Uganda, and I've seen it. I've seen the whole process.
But you've also said it's more expensive, and if we're talking about people up against the wall trying to feed a family on 30 quid, more expensive is not the way you're going to go.
No, exactly. But then that's what you were saying. People have got to cut the massive amounts of profit that these huge chains are making.
Your money or your morals? What do you say, Amy?
This has really torn the viewers, but we're going to go to Frank first on line 3. Okay.